show how to set up MySQL Cluster AutoInstaller with a sort of a little bit more for development, and show how you can also make use of the cluster installation that you have installed and start your development exercises. So it's always a good thing to make sure that the MySQL Cluster installation is in the path. So you can use this command to do that, and obviously it makes sense to put this into your startup script for your terminal. And so now we'll start up the AutoInstaller now that we have that in the path. So we're going to run with a new configuration, which we'll call test. It's still going to be a local configuration, so only one host, which is the local machine. No SSH properties or install properties, because we already installed everything. It's going to fetch information about my machine to make sure that I get a good configuration. That's all that's needed on this. And this time we're going to keep both the MySQL servers. That's going to require some configuration efforts on our side. So let's see what we need to do about that. So first of all, this is Mac OS X, so that means that I actually need to change the port to 3316 I use usually. 3306, which is the default port, is already used by the Apple operating system. And as you can see here, the port number actually automatically gets updated so it gets to be 3317. So that means that we're done now. We have the configurations that we wanted to change, and we're ready to go to the next step. We don't need to install the cluster, but we need to deploy the cluster, create the necessary directories, and distribute the configuration files to the machines where they are needed. And some of the configurations you can do in the AutoInstaller, but in this particular case, MySQL Server has decided that the X plugin is now default, and the AutoInstaller doesn't have all the configurations for that. So we'll go in and make sure that we disable the X plugin. So we'll do that by going into the CNF file and just writing. Of course, we could have configured the X plugin properly as well, so that you can have two MySQL servers using the X plugin on the same machine. I'm not going to do that exercise here. We also want to make it work with files, so we set the secure file privileges a little bit differently. And now the same thing we want to do on the second machine. So we want to edit the same thing here. Okay. We're done. So now let's start the cluster. Now it should start up the management server first, where it fetches the configuration from, and then it starts the data nodes, and after that it starts both of the MySQL servers. And remember now that we put the MySQL server 1 on port 3316, and the other server is on 3317. It's the MySQL service that we will access, so the data nodes are there too. And the cluster is started. Okay. So now let's do some activities. So let's first just connect to the cluster. There we go. So we connect to the one on port 3316. We start by creating a database to play around with. Test, we call that. Next, we want to create a table. So I've stolen I've taken a table from DBT3 benchmark. It's customer table there. And of course you want to select the database. So there we go, we have a table. Now, in order to do this, we want to copy the CSV file to its proper directory. And it's data test. And now let's use MySQL import to import the data. But before we do that, let's start another window here. And in this window, I want to run NDB top, just to show what the CPU activity is when we do this MySQL import. So now you see that the import is going on. The MySQL, the data node here is at data node 1, and you can see that it's doing a lot of receive because it's only shipping. MySQL import is not very parallelized, it just ships one row at a time. So therefore it takes fairly long time and takes fairly much CPU resources. And after a while it's done. And now we'll just go back. For example, we can do select count star now from customer. We can do show create table customer. And we can do select sum see account balance from customer on. And as you can see, that goes pretty fast. And then we'll decide that let's just delete from customer again. Deleting 75,000 at a time. And voila, the data is, we've been playing around with the database a little bit, and you can see with NDB top here that you can actually watch the activity, how much activity that actually is processed while you're doing those queries. So, and for example now we might want to connect an NDB management client to the cluster and show, for example here, this is actually what the AutoInstaller is doing to get the green lights and so forth, checks which nodes are up and running. So now let's just play around here, and let's say that we want to restart node number 2. And check what goes on here. So, starting or shutting down multi-threaded data node number 2. And as you can see here, it's has now shut down, and now the start is initiated automatically. And you can see things are still up and running, so we can still operate on the cluster. And now the cluster is up and running again. Everything is cool, and you can see things are green again. So, have fun playing around, and remember that the AutoInstaller is intended to get you going, to get your cluster up and running. It's not really intended to sort of be your management tool forever and ever, but it's really helpful to get the first cluster up and running, and then you can start twiggling with the configurations. You can start playing around with MySQL Server. You can try all the new interesting commands that 8018 contains, like explain, analyze, and many other fun things. So have fun.